Today is all about color. Join me behind the scenes of a vibrant fashion shoot. Plus, we're going to talk about color management and calibration with the Calibrite Display Pro HL. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and color is my thing. I use super saturated color throughout my work as an essential part of my style. I want to excite people with my images. I want to hold their attention, and color is one of those really important ways that I keep a viewer engaged. So whether it is a creative fashion editorial, a portrait, a commercial campaign, you name it, I am very purposeful about color. And so today you're going to get a peek at my thought process and workflow. You're going to get to take a look at the behind the scenes of a vibrant fashion shoot. Now, when I'm using color, I think about it at every part of the process, from my choices in clothing and background to considerations for color theory and color harmonies, my camera settings, my monitor calibration, my color grading, all of my post-processing. This video is sponsored by Calibrite. Now, the reason that they're partnering with me for this behind the scenes video is that we believe that color management and color management tools are essential for photographers. So now we're on set for the vibrant fashion shoot, but a lot has happened before we've gotten to this stage. We had to plan the hair, the makeup, the wardrobe. And so I actually began for the shoot with the inspiration of the dress. My wardrobe stylist showed me this beautiful purple dress, and then I had to figure out, well, how do I want to capture it? How do I want to build a shoot around this? And because color is so important to my style, I often begin with the question of what color harmony do I want to use? And so if you are brand new to color harmonies, I recommend you check out a tool at color.adobe.com. So let's take a look. This is an interactive color wheel. And what you can do is you can select a single color and then you can prompt it to show you different color harmonies. In other words, other colors that play well with the color you've selected. So for example, I could pick, let's say, a complementary color. And it's showing me that opposite the purple that I've chosen here is a little bit of like a yellow-green. That would be the complement. Or if I wanted to play around with triadic colors are equally spaced around the color wheel. And so if purple is my base, I've got a teal green and then a little bit of this orange for a triadic color scheme. So what I decided to do is actually a color scheme called split complementary. So what that means is you're taking some colors next to each other on the color wheel and then also using their complement. So this is actually a combination of two color harmonies, kind of. The first one is called an analogous color scheme. This is where the colors exist next to each other on the color wheel. So this would be pinks and blues and purples. The analogous color scheme is a very calming, very soothing color scheme, but I wanted something that was vibrant, that would really pop, create a lot of contrast. And so to create this contrast, I selected the color opposite on the color wheel. In this case, it's kind of a yellow-orange, and that is something called a split complementary. So that's what we're going to go with today. So if you were ever trying to figure out, okay, I've got a blue or a purple, or you name the color, and I don't know what other colors would work well with it, start with your color wheel. That's going to give you a lot of inspiration. My intention for this shoot is to use really saturated colors. And I want to make sure that they are accurately represented on my monitors. I'm actually using two different monitors here. I've got a MacBook Pro and I've got a BenQ. So I began by creating custom profiles by calibrating both of them using the Calibrite Display Pro HL. Even though the monitors are quite different, you'll notice that they match. The contrast and colors match, which means as I'm adjusting, as I'm shooting, I'm looking at accurate color, which is really important if you see in my style and the way that I shoot, because color is so important to me. Now, when I shoot, things often evolve, but a good place to start is by taking a picture of a color checker. Now, this is not only going to allow me to get accurate white balance, which is going to give me correct skin tones, but I can also use the white and black points to make sure that I'm maintaining detail in both. In other words, I don't want blown out highlights or shadows with no detail because it's going to be difficult or near impossible to recover them. So this will give me a good starting point for my exposure and then correct white balance. So will you do me a favor? Will you hold this right up next to your face? I just want to make sure that it is in the main light. Make sure it's fired. Beautiful. All right, so there's just a couple things I'm looking for. First of all, I can use my white balance eyedropper on the medium gray in order to get the correct white balance. You'll see that the skin tone got a little bit warmer and more pleasing. And then secondly, I just want to mouse over and see that I still have information in the whites and I also have detail in the blacks. So it just means my exposure is looking good. I've got a great place to start. But I know that I'm likely going to play around with some funky color, so all of this is going to change. So let's talk a little bit about my light. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to build in each light one by one, and this is where you're going to see that split complementary come to life. I'm going to begin with my neutral light, which is what you've seen on my subject already. Over here to the right-hand side of the frame, I have a Magnum reflector with a grid. This is going to give me beautiful, hard, crisp light on her face. It's going to be our white neutral light, and she has amazing cheekbones, so I chose this light because it really carves out her features. So let's take a look at what light number one is giving us in the equation. So we're starting off with the base. We have the purple dress, the purple background, and this would be a monochromatic color scheme. For example, I could light the background and it would be all one hue. And I could lean into that. That could be my color harmony. But I want something that plays around with a lot more colors, which is why we've chosen our split complement. So I need to start adding additional hues to the scene, which is why we're going to add our second light. Second light is to the back left-hand corner. We're using a stripped softbox with a grid. In this light, I've added a pink, a magenta gel. So let's see what that adds to the shot. So far with this color theory, we would be playing around with something called an analogous color scheme, meaning colors next to each other on the color wheel. We've expanded just a little bit. We've got the purples in the dress, the pink in the lips, we have the pink in the rim light, the blue in the eyes, and so it's giving us a little bit more to play with, but you can see how the colors really beautifully work together. We're using colors next to each other on the color wheel, and now we're going to add our contrasting pop of color, which is that hair light from above. It's another stripped softbox with a grid, but this time I have on a yellow, maybe a little bit of a yellow-orange gel. This is going to do a few things. It's going to light her hair from above, it's going to light her shoulders, but you'll notice that there's also a little bit of light spilling on the background. This is an accident on purpose. Right now, some of the light is spilling, it's also popping out the top of the light, and so it creates a little bit of like lines and texture to the background, but I think it makes it look more interesting. So let's take a look at that next light. So far so good, but I think that the color in the background is probably looking a little less saturated than I intended. Now, in a moment, I'm going to move over and start playing around with color grading, which is where I adjust the hue, the saturation, the contrast of the image. And I always do this when I'm shooting tethered because I want to see what's possible out of that file. And of course, I want to make sure I'm judging it from a calibrated monitor. Now, before we start playing around with color grading, I want to make sure I have all of my lights in place. So there's one more that I want to add to the equation for a creative effect. Now, all of the strobes I've been using here are in fact strobes, right? They're just pulses of light. They freeze the subject in place. But I want to switch that up, and I'm going to add a continuous light. I'm adding a Nanlite Pavotube. This is an RGB tube, and I'm going to make it blue. This is another color that is next to each other on the color wheel. So I have the pinks, the purples, the blues, but because it is continuous light, it is going to allow us to have a creative effect. All right, so let's turn on that light. What I want you to notice here is that if you look at the difference between those two images, you'll actually notice very minimal difference, right? You don't really see much blue, maybe just a little bit in the shimmer of the dress. And that is because right now, the way that I have my camera exposed, it's not allowing continuous light to register. So in order to see that blue, I need to do something called dragging the shutter. And so you can check out, I have many other videos that talk about this technique, but what I'm going to do is instead of shooting at 1/200th of a second for my shutter speed, I'm going to slow down to 1/10th of a second. The 1/10th of the second is going to allow the blue to register in the shadows, show up on the dress, and it's also going to allow me to introduce purposeful motion blur. I can move my camera, I can zoom my lens, and when I do so, you're going to see this beautiful streak in the image, which gives a sense of energy to the shot. So first I'll take an image where I don't wiggle my camera. I'll perhaps leave my stabilization on, and then in the second image, I'm going to turn it off and move around. Okay, let's see. First one. So something that you should notice is that the image looks horribly overexposed. It looks totally incorrect. And that's because when I dragged my shutter, I let in all of the ambient light, including, for example, the very bright modeling light on the face or the light that's illuminating me around the space. So in order for this to actually expose correctly, I need to start turning off my modeling lights. So I'm going to do that here. Okay, I have all of my lights in place. So now is the part of the equation where I want to come over and I want to make sure that I'm getting the color and the information out of the file I want with a little bit of color grading. All right, let's take a look at what we've accomplished so far. So first of all, when we turned off the ambient light, but still dragged the shutter, you can see that the beautiful blue shows up in the shadows on her face. And then when I actually move the camera, you see that I'm getting this beautiful blur ghosting effect reflected off of the dress, sometimes even off of her face. This is an effect caused by the shutter drag. And that's one of the reasons I was inspired by this dress to play around with that effect. The colors are not nearly as saturated as I intended. So what I want to do is I want to play around a little bit with color grading. So first and foremost, let me come over here and pop up my contrast. Now, this is meant to be fantasy, so I don't really need to have the colors accurate, but instead I'm going to judge off of my calibrated monitors, and I'm going to see how saturated I can get them before they start to break apart, before I start to see unpleasing banding, for example. So that looks good so far. I think that I want to play around a little bit with contrast. It's looking a little bit flat, but I notice that when I play around with contrast, some of the highlights start to get overexposed. So I'm going to darken down the exposure a little bit, which of course I could come back and do this in camera as well, and then maybe bring in some highlights. So far, here is what I'm doing before and after, and I think the picture is starting to look much more successful. I'm shooting tethered and editing into a program called Capture One. And I really like the look here, but I want to make sure all of my photographs now have that adjustment applied. So what I'm going to do is come over here into the top right-hand corner, and I'm going to copy and then apply those adjustments down. Everything is now going to have that effect. So there are only two more things I want to add into the equation here. I would like to add a little bit more atmosphere, and I'm going to do it in two ways. First of all, I'm going to add a filter. This is something called a Black Pro Mist. What it does is it takes highlights and it makes them glow. And so in this instance, if I have the corner of the lights in the frame or the light up top just peeking in, it's going to make it bloom. It just has a very atmospheric effect. And then I'm going to actually add a little atmosphere, if you will help me. And I'm going to use atmosphere aerosol. So aerosol in a can, we're going to spray that into the environment and it's going to catch some of the backlight. Oops. Then. Good. If you take a look to the top right-hand side of the frame, you can see that the strip softbox above is just glowing a little bit. It's hazing out, and there's just a little bit more texture to the image. But if I reset these adjustments, look how flat the image looks. Look how boring it looks. So that's why I always shoot tethered. I always color grade to make sure I'm controlling the color throughout. I always consider color theory, and I'm always judging my images from calibrated monitors. So now that I'm all set up for success, it's time to get the shoot. And so this is the time where I am paying attention to the angles of her face to that main light, to the pose. I'm making sure I try a lot of different camera movements. And of course, you'll notice I often get at a low angle because it makes her look tall and powerful. All of this working with a really beautiful split complementary color harmony. All right, let's do it. In these final images, you see just how vibrant they are and how they're another great example of how I utilize color throughout the entire process of creating my work. Color is considered at every single step. So the hair and the makeup, the wardrobe, the background, but then it's also considered in the more technical elements like my camera settings, my white balance, my monitor calibration, my color grading, and more. So when color is this important, like it is to me, you can't really miss any part of the equation. Thanks to Calibrite for partnering in this video. And if you want to make sure that you have your color management and your color workflow under control, you'll definitely want to check them out. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.